Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. Long ago, in the forgotten edges of Middle-earth, where the deep waters kissed the sunken ruins of ancient Beleriand, there stood a solitary tower. Its white stones, once gleaming like the stars, now wore cloaks of moss and mist. The tower was called Mindon Ninui, the Tower of the White Spray, for in its youth it had been a lighthouse for the elves, a beacon of hope across the wide seas. But Beleriand had fallen. The seas had claimed the great forests and shining cities, drowning them beneath endless waves. Only Mindon Ninui remained, a stubborn memory of a world that had passed into song and sorrow. Few spoke of it now, and fewer still dared approach its ghostly shores. Yet there was one who listened to the whispers of the world, one who cared for the forgotten and the small. His name was Radagast the Brown, a wizard sent from the far west, clothed not in splendor, but in earth and leaf. He was a friend to all living things, the birds, the beasts, and the whispering trees. And he had a heart full of gentle courage. Radagast had lived quietly in the woods of Rhosgobel, tending to the creatures of Middle-earth, until one night a dream came to him. It was not a dream like others, full of drifting nonsense and idle wonder. No. This dream was clear and sharp, and it carried a voice ancient and sorrowful. "Radagast," it called, "the last light of wisdom fades. Mindon Ninui holds the scrolls of the old knowledge. If they are not saved, all memory of the healing arts, of the tongues of beasts, and the ways of trees will be lost forever." He awoke at once, heart thundering like the wings of a startled bird. The morning sun had not yet risen, and the woods around his house were hushed in a heavy silence, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Without hesitation, Radagast rose and made ready. He donned his weathered brown robes, worn soft by years of use, and took up his gnarled staff, crowned with a sprouting green shoot. Upon his shoulder perched a robin, chirping anxiously, and around his feet scurried mice and stoats, sensing the urgency in their master's heart. Radagast spoke softly to them, as he always did, his voice kind and low. "Fear not, little ones. I must leave you for a time, but I go in the service of life itself." Thus, without grand farewells or trumpeted fanfares, Radagast set out from Rhosgobel, traveling westward where few dared tread. He journeyed through tangled forests and across forgotten hills, following the faint call of the sea that grew louder with each passing day. As he traveled, the land grew stranger. Trees bowed low as if mourning, and the grass grew thin and patchy, revealing scarred earth beneath. The winds carried a salt tang, and at night Radagast could hear the distant roar of the ocean, even though no shores were yet in sight. After many weary days, he came at last to a high cliff overlooking the restless sea. There, far below, upon a narrow strip of mist-shrouded land, stood Mindon Ninui, rising proudly despite the years of abandonment. Its tower pierced the heavens, a pale ghost against the dark sky, and the waves hissed and foamed around its crumbled base. But Radagast was not alone. From the rocks and ruins he saw shadows moving, twisted forms that did not belong to any living thing of Middle-earth. Their shapes shifted and writhed like smoke, and their eyes gleamed faintly with a sickly green light. Radagast narrowed his eyes. He knew at once that some dark spirit had claimed the tower, just as the dream had warned him. This would not be a simple journey of retrieval. It would be a test of will and wisdom. Still, he pressed onward, for to abandon the quest was to abandon hope. He found a narrow path that wound down the cliffside, slick with mist and treacherous underfoot. Carefully, he picked his way along, staff in hand, to steady him. The stones were cold and sharp, and several times he slipped, barely catching himself before tumbling into the sea's gaping maw below. As he neared the base of the cliff, the full ruin of the ancient land stretched before him. Broken archways and shattered statues lay half-buried in the sand, and the remains of what must once have been a great harbor jutted like the ribs of some fallen beast. The tower itself loomed close now, silent and forbidding. Its gates were sealed with a heavy door of gray stone, carved with intricate elven runes, long faded by time and salt. Yet even in their ruin, they seemed to murmur with a power beyond the touch of mortal hands. Radagast placed his hand upon the door, feeling its coldness seep into his bones. He whispered a few words in the ancient tongue of the Quendi, words taught him long ago by a wandering elf. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door gave a deep groan and a sliver of space opened, just wide enough for Radagast to slip through. Inside, the air was heavy and damp, filled with the scent of mold and old magic. The light was dim, filtering down from cracks high above, and everywhere the stone walls were etched with memories of a forgotten age. Ships with white sails, trees with silver leaves, and towers that reached beyond the stars. But amidst this beauty, there was a presence watching. Radagast could feel it, like a cold hand brushing the back of his neck. The corrupted Maia, who had claimed the tower, was aware of him now, and it would not let him pass unchallenged. The first riddle awaited him just beyond the threshold, carved into the stone floor in curling, graceful letters. What seeks must first be seen. Speak my name, or be forever unseen. Radagast frowned, stroking his beard thoughtfully. A test, then, the first of many. He knelt by the riddle, his mind working swiftly. The tower itself was ancient, tied to the elves longing for light across the sea, to be seen, to shine. What name would open the way? Suddenly he smiled. "Erendil," he said, voice ringing clear in the hollow chamber. At once the gloom lifted slightly, and a faint silvery light illuminated a winding stairway leading upward into the heart of the tower. Radagast rose, tightening his grip upon his staff. The path was open, but the true dangers had only just begun. Without fear, but with a heart heavy with foreboding, he stepped forward, vanishing into the shadows of Mindon Ninui. Radagast ascended the winding stair, each step worn and crumbling with the passage of uncounted years, and his staff rang softly against the stone as he climbed. The air grew colder with every upward stride, and the walls pressed close about him, as though the tower itself breathed with slow and ancient life. Around him the silence thickened, broken only by the distant sighing of the sea below, and the occasional creak of stone strained by the ages. Yet the silence was not empty, for hidden within it was the presence of the dark spirit, lingering like a stain upon the very air. The stair ended in a narrow landing from which a vast hall opened, its roof supported by great pillars carved in the likeness of trees, their branches entwining far above. The dim light that filtered down from unseen cracks caught the gleam of faded murals upon the walls, and Radagast beheld the tales of old, the building of Tirion, the glory of Valinor, and the long voyages over the sundering seas. The beauty of these works, though marred by time, stirred his heart. Yet he could not tarry to admire them, for he was reminded with every heartbeat of the urgency of his quest. At the far end of the hall stood a throne wrought of white stone, and upon it sat a figure clad in shadow. Its form was ever-shifting, a vague suggestion of a man cloaked in mist and hatred. Two eyes, pale as dying coals, fixed themselves upon Radagast, and though no word was spoken, the challenge was clear. This was the guardian of the tower, the dark remnant of a Maia who had once served the designs of Morgoth, now abandoned and festering in its own malice. Radagast stood firm, his staff held before him like a beacon against the encroaching dark. He knew he could not match this spirit in battle of strength or sorcery alone. For though he was wise in the ways of the living world, he was no master of the deeper arts of power wielded by his kindred. Instead, he must rely upon what strength he had, his wits, his knowledge, and the purity of his purpose. The shadow rose from the throne, and as it did, a low, sibilant whisper filled the hall, weaving about Radagast like smoke. Words half heard and half felt slithered into his mind. You seek what is lost. You seek what you cannot hold. Turn back, little one of the earth, lest your bones join the stones of this place. Radagast answered not with fear, but with a voice steady and calm, though it echoed strangely in the vastness. I seek not for my own glory, he said, nor for pride or mastery, but for the healing of Middle-earth, that the wounds of old may be mended, and the sorrow of the world lessened. At this the shadow hissed, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop, so that Radagast's breath misted before him like pale smoke. The ground trembled, and from the floor sprang forth tendrils of darkness, like roots of some foul tree, seeking to snare him where he stood. Swiftly, Radagast raised his staff and struck the stone with its butt, and a ripple of green light spread outwards, driving the tendrils back. He began to chant softly at first, but with growing strength, a song of Yavanna, the giver of fruits, whose power still lived in the hidden places of the world. The spirit recoiled before the song, for it was a thing of life and growth, and it hated such things beyond all telling. Yet even as it fell back, the shadow did not flee, but instead shifted its assault. From the far corners of the hall came creeping creatures, twisted mockeries of life, beasts with many eyes, and slinking forms like wolves, wrought of mist and fear. They surrounded Radagast in a tightening ring, their breath foul and their gaze venomous. The wizard stood his ground, heart racing yet unwavering, and with a cry he sent forth the power of his staff once more. A great flash of emerald light burst forth, and many of the creatures fell back, shrieking and dissolving into vapor. Yet they were countless, and new shapes coiled forth from the shadows to replace them. Radagast knew he could not simply batter his way through. He must find the true source of the corruption and confront it. His eyes scanned the hall swiftly, noting the flow of the shadow's strength, and he saw that above the throne, set into the wall, was a great stone eye, carved in the likeness of the stars. But now it was blackened and weeping a slow, tar-like icicle. Understanding dawned upon him. The eye was the anchor of the spirit, The fountain from which its hold over the tower was sustained. If he could reach it, perhaps he could break the spell that bound Mindon Ninui to darkness. Tightening his grip on his staff, Radagast began to move, weaving his way through the clutching foes with agility born of his woodland life. He leapt over a writhing tendril, ducked beneath the swipe of a shadow wolf, and pressed onward ever toward the throne. The spirit shrieked in rage and fear, its voice now a cacophony that rattled the very stones. When at last he reached the dais, Radagast planted his staff firmly before him and began to chant anew, pouring into his song all the love he bore for the green and growing things of Arda, all the sorrow he felt for the ruin of the world, and all the hope that still lingered in his heart for its healing. The staff flared with living light, and the darkness recoiled in agony. The eye above the throne quivered and cracked, and from within it, a blinding light began to leak. With a final cry, Radagast struck the base of the throne with his staff, and the stone split asunder. The eye shattered with a sound like a bell tolling in the deep places of the world, and the shadow, bereft of its anchor, screamed and was torn apart like mist before a gale. Silence fell once more, deep and profound, and Radagast sank to his knees, spent but victorious. Around him the hall brightened as the gloom receded, and the murals upon the walls seemed to shine anew, touched by a memory of their ancient beauty. He had won the first trial, but his quest was not yet ended. Somewhere higher in the tower, beyond more tests and perils, lay the lost scrolls of the elves. Gathering his strength, Radagast rose once more, and with steady steps began to climb the next stair, disappearing into the ever-deepening mysteries of Mindon Ninui. The stair wound upward in a slow and weary spiral, carved deep into the heart of the tower, and Radagast's steps rang hollow against the ancient stones, their surfaces worn smooth by the tread of countless feet now long departed into memory. The air grew heavier as he ascended, filled with a scent like that of old earth and forgotten rain. And though the darkness had lessened after the fall of the spirit below, a deep unease still clung to the tower, as though the stones themselves remembered the touch of evil and could not yet cast off their dread. Radagast climbed steadily, leaning upon his staff, though the weariness of his body pressed upon him with growing weight, for the labors of his confrontation had not left him unscathed. Yet his heart was resolute, for he knew that time pressed against him like a closing hand. Should the scrolls of the elves remain here too long, unguarded and undefended, they might fall prey to powers darker still, drawn by the death cry of the fallen Maia. After a time that seemed to stretch into long ages, the stair ended at a wide landing, and before him stood a pair of doors fashioned of white wood, now yellowed with age and banded with silver that had tarnished to a dull gray. Upon the panels were carved images of trees in full bloom, their boughs heavy with fruits and flowers, and beneath them the flowing script of the Eldar spoke a silent warning. Only the hand of one who knows the roots of all things may open the way. Radagast paused, setting his hand upon the wood, and he pondered the meaning of the riddle, for he was no stranger to the ways of trees and living things. He recalled the old songs of Yavanna, the making of the two trees of Valinor, and the hidden names of the ancient forests. And he understood that this was no riddle of cunning or pride, but a test of wisdom born from love of the natural world. Closing his eyes, he whispered in the ancient tongue of the Quendi, the secret names of the trees he had known. Malorn and Learlos, oak and holly, beech and birch, the white bark of the birches gleaming in winter's hand, the gold of the Malorn leaves shining in the eternal spring. As he spoke, the doors trembled beneath his fingers, and slowly, with a sigh like the falling of autumn leaves, they swung open, revealing a chamber beyond. The room into which Radagast stepped was round and lofty, its walls lined with shelves fashioned of living wood, branches intertwined in intricate patterns to hold ancient scrolls, tomes, and relics. The floor was of polished stone, inlaid with designs of roots and vines, and overhead a great dome rose, its surface painted with images of stars, trees, and the great seas that once encircled the lost lands of Beleriand. A pale light filtered down from unseen heights, suffusing the chamber with a soft radiance, and for a moment Radagast stood in awe. For here was a treasure not of gold or jewels, but of memory and hope. Yet even here danger lurked, for the air was heavy with a latent power, and Radagast perceived that the scrolls were guarded still, not by malice, but by wards set in ages past by the elves themselves, that none unworthy might lay hand upon them. He stepped carefully, mindful of unseen traps, and as he moved among the shelves, he sang under his breath songs of healing and growth, songs that the trees might know and accept as the token of his goodwill. In the center of the room, upon a low pedestal of white marble, lay the object of his quest, a bundle of scrolls wrapped in a cloth of silver thread green, marked with the sign of Lorien, the gardens of Irmo, where dreams and memory were woven together into the tapestry of the world. Radagast approached with reverence, feeling the pulse of life that lingered within the writings, for these were no common words, but lore that had been blessed by the Valar themselves. As he stretched out his hand, a soft voice, musical and sorrowful, filled the chamber, though no speaker was to be seen. "Name the keeper of the trees, or be turned away into shadow." Radagast bowed his head, recalling the tales told by the wandering elves he had once hosted in Rhosgobel, and he spoke with clear voice. "Yavanna Kementari, the giver of fruits, beloved of Aule, queen of all things that grow in the earth." At once the air grew lighter, and the unseen wards receded like mist before the morning sun. Radagast took up the scrolls with careful hands, feeling their ancient strength and wisdom humming faintly through the wrappings. Yet even as he did so, the tower trembled beneath his feet, and a deep rumbling like the growl of a great and angered beast echoed up from the foundations. The destruction of the Maia's anchor had not gone unnoticed, and darker powers, lingering in the far corners of the world, had turned their gaze upon the tower. Radagast knew he could not linger. He must depart before the tide of shadow rose again to claim what had once been holy. Gathering the scrolls to his breast, he turned back toward the doors. But already the light was fading, and the shadows deepened, coiling along the floor and walls like living things. The very tower seemed to resist his leaving, as though the ancient magic that had once protected it was now twisted against all who sought escape. Radagast quickened his pace, his heart pounding with urgency. Yet he did not panic, for panic was the death of wisdom. He sang again, louder now, weaving into his voice all the strength of the forests, the enduring spirit of the hills, and the resilience of all growing things. The shadows recoiled before the sound, hissing and twisting, but they did not wholly withdraw. At the threshold of the stair, Radagast paused, glancing back once at the chamber he had left behind. He knew he could not save the tower itself, for its time had passed into legend, and it must now follow the fate of all mortal works. But the knowledge he carried would live, and through it, the memory of Beleriand and the wisdom of the Eldar would yet flower again in Middle-earth. With a final whisper of farewell, he stepped onto the stair and began his descent, the scrolls clutched tightly in his arms, the shadows swirling in his wake like a host of unseen foes. The stair spiraled downward into deepening darkness, and though Radagast moved with care and quiet swiftness, the weight of the tower's age seemed to lean against him, as if each step he took stirred ancient foundations that groaned in protest. Shadows that slithered along the walls were no longer passive. They darted and coiled like serpents, reaching for his cloak and his staff. And the stones themselves grew treacherous, worn slick with the breath of the sea and the long, patient dripping of unseen waters. Yet Radagast, though his breath grew labored and his limbs ached from the toils he had endured, pressed onward, for he bore a burden now of greater worth than any treasure hoarded in the vaults of kings. The scrolls were warm against his chest, as though a living spirit resided within them, urging him onward, lending him strength even as the tower strove to keep him captive. He murmured soft prayers to Yavanna and to Orome the huntsman, whose steps had once shaken the earth in pursuit of dark things. And his words, though quiet, seemed to weave a path before him, warding off the most treacherous of the shadows that groped from the cracks and crevices. Time lost all meaning in that dreadful descent, and Radagast could not tell if minutes or hours passed, for the weight of the tower's ancient sorrow lay heavy upon him, dulling the senses and stretching the moments like strands of web. He began to fear that he would never find the ground again, that he would spiral downward forever, a wandering shade among the ruins of lost ages. But at last, as his heart faltered and his legs grew lean, a faint, salt-laden breeze touched his face, and he knew that he had drawn near to the lower halls, where the broken gates of the tower opened once more to the weeping sea. Renewed by this hope, Radagast quickened his pace, though the path grew no less perilous. For the tower, sensing the escape of its captive, unleashed its last defenses. From the shadows before him emerged a host of figures, tall and terrible, clad in the semblance of ancient warriors, whose bones now lay scattered beneath the waves. They bore swords of shadow and shields wrought of mist, and their eyes burned with cold fire, not with life, but with a hunger for remembrance and vengeance. Their forms were wreathed in a sorrow so deep and bitter that even Radagast, whose heart was strong with compassion, faltered at the sight of them. Yet he knew these were but shades, memories twisted by the sorceries that lingered still in the stones of Mindon Ninui. They had no true will, only the semblance of purpose, and they could be undone if he but remembered who he was and what power he bore. Straightening his back and planting his staff firmly before him, Radagast lifted his voice and sang a song of awakening, of green things growing beneath the light of the stars, of rivers singing through the valleys, and of birds greeting the dawn with their glad cries. The song flowed outward, filling the hollow spaces of the tower with its gentle might, and the shades faltered, their forms shivering and blurring like smoke in the rising sun. Some turned away, their weapons lowering, and others simply crumbled into dust, their long watch ended by the power of a hope greater than any memory of sorrow. Yet still some remained, those whose grief and rage had grown into chains that even death could not easily break. Seeing that his song alone would not suffice, Radagast raised his staff high, and from its tip there burst forth a shaft of green light, bright and pure as spring's first leaf. He swept the light before him, and where it passed, the shades shrieked and fell away, leaving the path clear once more. Without pause, he pressed onward, for he knew that delay might yet prove fatal. The tower shook and groaned about him, great cracks splitting the walls, and stones fell from the ceiling in thundering cascades. The sea, too, seemed to rise against him, waves crashing with greater fury against the base of the tower, as though it sought to swallow the last remnant of the lost world whole. Yet Radagast, guided by the keen sense of purpose that had brought him so far, found at last the archway that led to the broken gates. They stood now ajar, torn from their hinges by the slow, relentless labor of time and tide, and beyond them, the gray expanse of the sea stretched into the mist, endless and unknowable. The land upon which the tower had stood was little more than a strip of rocky beach in shattered ruins, but it was enough. Freedom lay beyond, if he could but reach it. Steeling himself for a final effort, Radagast stepped through the gates, and no sooner had he done so than a great cry arose from the tower behind him, a cry not of any living thing, but of stone and memory breaking under the weight of its doom. Mindon Ninui, last tower of drowned Beleriand, began to crumble, its proud spire tilting and falling with a sound like the wailing of the world. Radagast ran, his staff in one hand, the scrolls clutched to his chest with the other, as stones rained down about him, and the ground quivered and cracked beneath his feet. The beasts of the shadow, those that had survived his light and song, pursued him still, howling with rage and despair. But they too were caught in the tower's ruin, swept away by falling debris in the rising waters. He reached a rocky outcropping at the edge of the surf, breathless and battered, and turned to look once more upon the place that had been. The tower was no more. Only a jagged stump of stone remained, half submerged and shrouded in mist, and already the sea was claiming it, waves gnawing hungrily at the last relics of an age long gone. Radagast bowed his head, honoring the memory of Mindon Ninui and the lost beauty it had represented. Though the tower had fallen, its wisdom lived on, preserved in the scrolls he bore, and through them perhaps the healing of Middle-earth might yet be accomplished. Turning his face from the ruins, Radagast set out along the rocky shore, the gulls crying overhead and the wind tugging at his tattered robes. His journey was far from over, for he must find safe haven for the scrolls, and many dangers yet lay between him and the green woods of Rhosgobel. But for the moment, he allowed himself a brief smile, for he had succeeded where few would even have dared, and the seeds of hope he carried were precious beyond all reckoning. Thus, Radagast the Brown, servant of the living earth, bore away the last light of Beleriand, carrying it into the uncertain future of Middle-earth. The wind rose as Radagast made his way along the broken shore, bearing with it the sharp tang of salt and the mournful cries of the seabirds circling overhead, their white wings flashing like signals against the gray and troubled sky. Beneath his feet, the stones shifted and slid, treacherous with moss and brine, and every step was a labor, for the sea had long claimed dominion over this place, and did not welcome the tread of the living. Yet Radagast pressed onward, the scrolls held close to his breast, their warmth a comfort against the chill that gnawed at his bones and sought to sap the strength from his limbs. The path ahead was uncertain and perilous, for there was no true road through the ruins of drowned Beleriand, only a scattering of islets, reefs, and broken headlands, remnants of a land that had once been fair and full of song, but now lay silent beneath the waves. In times long past, mighty cities had risen, where now only the restless sea reigned, and the memories of those who had dwelt there lingered still, heavy upon the air, whispering in voices only half heard at the edge of the mind. For a time, Radagast moved without hindrance, save for the hardship of the terrain, and he allowed himself to hope that the worst of the trials was behind him. Yet he knew in his heart that it could not be so, for the destruction of the tower had not gone unnoticed in the wider world, and darker things than the broken spirit he had vanquished still walked abroad under the sky. He had felt their gaze as he fled the falling tower. A sense of malice awakened and turned upon him, patient and relentless as the slow grinding of stone. Thus it was that even as he reached a stretch of higher ground, a narrow ridge of rock jutting out into the sea, he became aware of a presence that stalked his steps, unseen but not unfelt. The hairs upon the back of his neck bristled, and his heart quickened, not with fear, but with the grim certainty of one who knows he is hunted. He turned his head slowly, scanning the mists and shadows, but saw nothing save the swirling fog and the lonely sweep of the tide against the rocks. Still he moved onward, for to tarry would be folly, and he called softly upon the small creatures of the shore, the gulls and terns, the crabs scuttling among the stones, and the shy otter that peered from among the reeds, beseeching them in the speech of the beasts to watch the way behind and give warning of any foe. Their replies came in faint cries and murmured rustlings, and though they could not name the thing that followed, they spoke of a darkness that moved with purpose and malice, cloaked in shadows deeper than night. Radagast's thoughts turned swiftly to the nature of his pursuer, and he knew that it was no mere beast or wandering spirit. It was a servant of greater darkness, perhaps a lingering fragment of Morgoth's ancient malice, or a lesser spirit now awakened by the fall of Mindon Ninui, hungry for power and for the ancient lore that Radagast carried. He must be cunning, therefore, and swift, for a direct confrontation would surely end in ruin. The ridge upon which he walked ended abruptly at a sheer drop into the foaming sea, and for a moment Radagast stood still, considering his course. To the left the cliffs rose steeply, pitted with caves and gullies, while to the right the rocks fell away to a narrow beach strewn with driftwood and wrack. Above the sky darkened as heavy clouds gathered, promising rain and the fury of the storm. Choosing the beach, Radagast began to descend a steep and crumbling path, his staff probing carefully before him, for the stones were loose and the footing uncertain. The descent was perilous, and more than once he slipped, scraping hands and knees upon the sharp rocks. But he clutched the scrolls tightly, shielding them with his body, and at length he reached the shore, panting and bruised, but unbroken. No sooner had he set foot upon the beach than he heard a sound behind him, faint yet distinct, the scrape of claws upon stone, and a low, guttural snarl that carried upon the wind. Radagast did not look back, but pressed onward, hastening his steps along the shore, seeking some place where he might find shelter, or at least a defensible position. The beach curved inland, leading to a narrow cove sheltered by tall cliffs, and into this haven Radagast fled, the sand soft beneath his feet, and the roar of the surf growing louder as the tide pressed inward. At the far end of the cove, he found what he had hoped for: the entrance to a sea cave, its mouth gaping like the maw of some ancient beast, dark and deep and hidden from the open shore. With a final glance behind him, where he saw at last the vague shape of his pursuer, a hulking form cloaked in writhing shadow, its eyes gleaming red as embers, Radagast darted into the cave, moving quickly but with care, for he knew that while the cave offered shelter, it might also prove a trap should he be cornered within. The cave stretched back into the cliff, twisting and narrowing, and Radagast moved deeper, guided by the faint glow of his staff, until he found a hollow where the walls closed in, forming a small chamber with only a single narrow entrance. Here he turned at bay, setting the scrolls upon a ledge of stone where they would be safe from the damp, and raising his staff high, he called upon the ancient powers of the earth to grant him strength and protection. A shadow thing entered the cave with a hiss like steam upon cold stone, its form shifting and muttering in the gloom. And as it advanced, Radagast saw it clearly for the first time. It was no beast of flesh and blood, but a spirit of malice and hunger, clothed in a semblance of form by dark sorceries, its shape changing with every breath, now a wolf with slathering jaws, now a serpent coiling through the air, now a man crowned with horns and bearing a blade of smoke. It spoke, though its voice was more felt than heard, a whispering in the mind that grated against the heart. "Give me the knowledge you bear, little wizard, and I shall spare your miserable life. Defy me, and you shall be unmade, your essence scattered to the winds of this dying world." Radagast stood firm, though the fear that gnawed at his belly was sharp, and he answered with the calm certainty of one who speaks the truth. "I am but a keeper of what was entrusted to me. If you would claim it, you must pass through the living strength of the earth itself, and that you shall not do while my heart beats." Then with a cry he struck the floor of the cave with his staff, and a tremor ran through the stone, shaking dust from the ceiling and sending small rocks clattering to the ground. The spirit recoiled, and Radagast pressed the attack, chanting words of power taught to him long ago by the eldest of the Ents and by the wise ones of Yavanna's court. The battle that followed was fierce and bitter, not of swords and shields, but of will and spirit. A clash of life against unlife, of growth against decay. The cave shook with the fury of their contest, and outside the storm broke at last, rain lashing the cliffs and thunder rolling like the drums of a distant war. But Radagast did not falter, for he was fighting not for himself alone, but for all that grew and sang and dreamed under the wide sky of Middle-earth. The clash of wills within the narrow cave grew in ferocity as the storm raged without, and the roar of thunder and the howling of the wind seemed to echo the battle that unfolded beneath the earth. Radagast, though weary and battered, stood unwavering before the advancing shadow. His staff, a beacon of green and golden light that thrust back the clinging tendrils of darkness. And the spirit, maddened by resistance, surged forward in a tide of black malice, its ever-shifting form writhing like smoke caught in a gale. The air within the cave grew thick and oppressive, heavy with the stench of corruption and old festering hatred, and the very stones groaned under the strain of the powers at war within their confines. The spirit loosed a shriek, a soundless cry that tore at the mind rather than the ear. and from its amorphous body it hurled forth darts of shadow, swift and venomous, seeking to pierce Radagast's defenses and strike at the heart that defied it. Yet Radagast, though no warrior in the manner of the great captains of men or the lords of the Eldar, had a strength deeper and more enduring than steel, for it was the strength of the living world itself, of the slow, patient growth of roots beneath stone, of the quiet persistence of flowers blooming after the harshest winters. He raised his staff high, and from its tip blossomed a great shield of light, woven from the songs of the trees and the rivers, the language of birds and the whispering of green leaves, and the dark missiles shattered harmlessly upon its gleaming surface. The spirit recoiled, shrieking once more, and gathered itself for a final assault, its form coalescing into a monstrous visage, vast and crowned with horns like the roots of a twisted oak, its gaping maw dripping with black venom. Radagast did not retreat, but stood his ground, drawing deeply upon the wellspring of life that flowed unseen through the world, that source from which Yavanna herself had once drawn the breath of creation. His chant rose higher, no longer merely a song, but a proclamation of life's endurance, and the very walls of the cave answered him, ancient stones stirring with slow might, as if remembering the time when they had been young beneath the stars. As the shadow closed upon him, Radagast struck the ground with his staff a second time, and the earth shuddered in answer. From the cracks and fissures of the stone burst forth vines and roots, pale and glistening with the sap of hidden life, and they seized the spirit, twining about it, binding its thrashing limbs and muffling its screams. The spirit struggled fiercely, tearing at the living bonds, and the cave trembled with its rage, but the roots held firm, nourished by the will of the wizard and the ancient blessing of the earth itself. Radagast advanced then, step by steady step, chanting words of banishment in a tongue so old that few now remembered it. Words that spoke of the rightful order of the world, of the harmony between earth and sky, between living creature and green growing thing. The spirit writhed and howled, its form collapsing inward upon itself, shrinking and twisting as the light of Radagast's staff grew brighter, filling the cave with a radiance that drove all shadow before it. At last, with a cry like the rending of iron, the spirit was torn asunder, its substance dissolving into a black mist that was swept away by the rising wind, leaving behind only a faint and bitter scent of decay. The cave fell silent, save for the steady drip of water from the ceiling and the distant rumble of the storm outside. And Radagast, breathing heavily, lowered his staff and sank to one knee, his strength nearly spent. For a long while he remained thus, gathering what little energy he could from the deep reserves of his spirit, and listening to the slow, rhythmic beating of the earth's heart, a sound that few in Middle-earth could hear, but which he had always known from the earliest days of his wandering. When at last he rose, his limbs ached, and his cloak hung heavy with damp, but the scrolls were safe, untouched by the conflict, their silver-green wrappings gleaming softly in the faint light. Radagast took them once more into his arms and made his way to the cave's mouth, stepping out into the wild fury of the storm. Rain lashed his face, and the wind tugged at his robes. But he moved steadily along the narrow beach, seeking higher ground and the shelter of the land beyond the broken cliffs. Above him the sky churned with dark clouds, and the sea roared with an endless voice. But he did not falter, for he knew that his path, though perilous still, was set before him by a purpose greater than any fear. As he climbed from the beach to the broken highlands beyond, the storm began to abate, and a pale light filtered through the clouds, the first tentative promise of dawn. Radagast turned his face eastward toward the distant woods of Rhosgobel, and though the way was long and fraught with unknown perils, his heart was steadfast, for he bore not merely ancient scrolls of forgotten lore, but the hope of a world that might yet be healed, if only those who loved it remained faithful and true. Thus, with weary steps but undiminished spirit, Radagast the Brown set forth from the ruins of Beleriand, a solitary figure against the vastness of sea and sky, bearing with him the last gift of a lost age into the uncertain days to come. The days that followed were long and weary, for the land Radagast traversed was wild and desolate, the remnants of ancient realms long drowned and forgotten. And though the seas no longer claimed these heights, they had left their mark upon the earth, scouring it into barren hills and jagged cliffs. The grasses were thin and salt-stained, and few trees grew save for twisted and gnarled things, their branches like bony fingers clawing at the gray sky. Yet the scrolls remained safe within the folds of Radagast's cloak, and the warmth they seemed to radiate lent him a strength beyond that of his body, urging him ever eastward toward the green lands he longed to see once more. For many leagues he traveled alone, save for the company of the birds that wheeled overhead, or the small furtive creatures that scuttled among the rocks. And though the loneliness weighed heavily upon him, he found solace in the enduring life that still clung to the broken earth, stubborn and silent. In the evenings he would light a small fire, kindled with careful words and the aid of his staff, and would sit wrapped in his cloak, speaking softly to the land, telling its stories of the forests and gardens he had known, as if by his remembrance he might call forth new life from the barren stones. Thus it was, after many days, that Radagast came at last to the edge of the wild, where the land softened, and the grasses grew greener, and the scent of living things carried sweet upon the breeze. Ahead of him, nestled in a hollow between the hills, he espied the smoke of fires and the rough palisades of a village of men, simple folk by the look of it, yet stout of heart, dwelling in a place that was still half wild and half tamed. Hope stirred within Radagast, for he thought that here he might find rest for a time, and perhaps gain news of the lands beyond. Drawing his cloak more tightly about him to shield the scrolls from prying eyes, Radagast descended the slope toward the village, leaning upon his staff, and though his steps were slow and weary, he carried himself with a quiet dignity of one who bears great purpose, though the world knows it not. Yet as he approached, he saw that the villagers had spied him as well, and they gathered near the gates, armed with spears and axes, their faces weary and grim. These were hard people, Radagast saw at once, shaped by the harshness of their land and the constant threats that prowled its edges. And they had no trust for wanderers who came clad in tattered robes, bearing staffs and strange devices. To them, Radagast was no wise lore-keeper or guardian of ancient truths, but a stranger, and therefore a threat. He halted a short distance from the gate, lifting his staff in token of peace, and called out to them in a clear voice, "Hail, good folk of this land! I am but a traveler, seeking shelter for a night, and news of the road ahead. I bring no harm, and ask only for kindness and a place by your fire." There was a murmuring among the villagers, and one among them, a tall man, clad in a wolf-skinned cloak, and bearing a great axe, stepped forward. His eyes were sharp and suspicious, and when he spoke, his voice was like the grinding of stones. "Strangers we do not trust, old man," he said, "for of late there have been many ill things abroad in the wild, and more than one village has fallen to shadow and ruin. If you bring no harm, then prove it, or be gone from our sight." Radagast, understanding that words alone would not suffice to win their trust, reached into his cloak and drew forth a small seed, no larger than a raindrop, yet pulsing with a faint green light. He knelt and pressed it into the earth, whispering words of growth and blessing. And before the eyes of the villagers there sprang up a sapling, swift and strong, its leaves unfurling like banners of spring, its slender trunk gleaming silver in the fading light. A murmur of wonder ran through the gathered folk, and even the grim leader's eyes widened in astonishment, for they had seen no such marvel before. Slowly the tension at the gate eased, and the man lowered his axe, though he did not yet wholly abandon his caution. "You are no common wanderer," he said at length. "There is old power in you, of the kind we know little and fear much. Yet you have shown no evil, and for that you may pass. Though I warn you, keep your sorceries close and cause no strife, lest you find the hospitality of our village short indeed." Radagast bowed low, accepting the terms with humility, and the gates were opened to him. Within the village was a humble place of rough huts and muddy lanes, but it was filled with the sounds of life, the cries of children at play, the barking of dogs, the clatter of pots and pans as the evening meal was prepared. Smoke rose in lazy curls from the hearths, and the smell of roasting meat and baking bread stirred hunger within Radagast's belly, though he had long ago learned to live upon little. He was given a place near the main fire, where the village elders gathered in a circle of worn stones, and there he sat, drying his cloak and warming his hands, while the villagers watched him with curious eyes. Some whispered among themselves, speculating as to his nature and purpose, but Radagast paid them little heed, for he was content to sit quietly and rest, knowing that his true task was to pass through this place swiftly and without drawing undue attention. Yet even as he sat there, savoring the warmth and the brief respite from his long journey, he felt again that faint stirring of unease, a sense that unseen eyes were upon him, probing and searching. Not from the villagers, whose suspicions were natural and plain, but from another presence, one cloaked in the guise of a friend, yet harboring a darkness deep within. Radagast knew then that his journey would not pass unnoticed, and that the forces which had stirred at the fall of Mindon Ninui still pursued him, even here in the seeming safety of mortal habitations. Thus he kept his staff close at hand, and slept lightly that night, ready to rise at a moment's notice, for the road before him was long yet, and the perils that lay ahead would test even the most steadfast of hearts. The night settled heavily upon the village, cloaking the humble huts and fields in a thick darkness, broken only by the wavering gleam of the fires that guttered in their hearths. Above the clouds that had threatened rain all day, now loomed low and heavy, and the stars, those ancient sentinels of the sky, were hidden from sight, as if unwilling to bear witness to what would come. Radagast, wrapped in his worn cloak, lay upon a pallet of straw in a small hut that had been granted him. The scrolls nestled safely at his side, and though his body ached with the longing for deep rest, his mind remained wakeful and wary. Outside the village was quiet, save for the murmuring of the wind among the eaves and the occasional cry of some restless dog. Yet to Radagast's ears attuned to the subtle stirrings of the earth and the life it bore, there came another sound, faint and furtive. The soft scuffle of feet upon the trodden paths, the almost imperceptible whisper of breath held too long, the creak of a door opened with painful slowness. He listened intently, his senses stretched taut as a bowstring, and he knew without doubt that something moved in the darkness beyond, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a darker purpose. Quietly he rose, careful not to disturb the scrolls, and took up his staff, its gnarled length seeming to pulse faintly in his grasp, as if eager for the call to action. He moved to the door of the hut, and without opening it, peered through a narrow crack between the timbers. What he saw confirmed his fears, for 3 figures moved stealthily through the village, cloaked and hooded, their shapes blurred and shifting in the gloom, and in their hands they bore knives that gleamed dully in the firelight. They were not common thieves, Radagast perceived at once, for there was a purpose to their movements, a hunger that was not for gold or food, but for something of deeper and more terrible value. Drawing a long breath, Radagast considered his course. He might slip away unseen, leaving the villagers to deal with the danger unawares. But such a path was not his way, nor could he bear the thought of innocent blood spilled because of the peril that followed him. Therefore, he resolved to act swiftly and without violence if it could be managed, for he held no hatred for these folk, even if some among them had given their hearts to darker whispers. He pushed the door open and stepped into the night, his staff held lightly before him, and with a word spoken in the secret tongue of the birds, he summoned a soft breeze to stir the village fires, casting sudden shadows and light across the paths. The hooded figures hesitated at the sight, and in that moment Radagast advanced, his voice ringing clear and firm across the stillness. "Hold your steps," he commanded, "and lay aside the weapons you bear, for they are turned to evil purpose, and evil shall be their end." The 3 turned toward him, and for a breath they stood motionless, as if caught between flight and attack. Then the leader, a tall figure whose face was hidden deep within his hood, stepped forward with a low, mocking laugh, the sound dry and bitter as the rustling of dead leaves. "You carry a treasure not meant for such as you, old fool," he said. "Give it up, and perhaps we shall spare your life. Resist, and you shall be left as food for the crows." Radagast regarded him calmly, and though outwardly he showed no anger, there was a light kindling in his eyes that spoke of the deep well of power he could call upon, if need be. "You know not what you seek," he replied. "The wisdom of the Eldar is not for the hands of the faithless, nor for the service of darkness. Turn away now, while you yet may." But the leader only laughed again, and at his signal the other 2 rushed forward, knives flashing. Radagast, though no warrior, moved with a swiftness born of purpose rather than training. He struck the earth with his staff and spoke a word of binding, and from the ground sprang tendrils of living vine, thick and strong, which coiled about the legs and arms of the attackers, pulling them down with cries of fear and anger. In his hand he bore not a simple knife, but now marked by the taint of shadow, his skin gray and his eyes burning with a cruel light. In his hand he bore not a simple knife, but a short blade of black iron foul with ancient sorcery, and he advanced upon Radagast with a snarl of hatred. Radagast raised his staff once more, but before he could speak, a voice rang out from the darkness. The voice of the wolf-cloaked chieftain who had first challenged him at the village gate. "Hold!" cried the chieftain, and with him came a score of men bearing torches and spears, their faces grim and set. "What treachery is this, under the roof of our hospitality?" The dark servant turned at the sound, and for a moment his will faltered, caught between the strength of Radagast's quiet defiance and the sudden appearance of armed men. With a cry of rage, he turned and fled into the night, vanishing among the hills, and the villagers, though swift in pursuit, dared not follow him far into the darkness, fearing the unseen things that lurked beyond the light of their fires. The two lesser attackers, still ensnared by Radagast's vines, were taken and bound, and though they spat and cursed, they could do no more harm. The chieftain approached Radagast then, and there was a new look in his eyes. Not suspicion, but a deep and abiding respect. "You have saved us from a darkness we did not know had entered our homes," he said. "For that, we owe you a debt we cannot easily repay." Radagast inclined his head, weary beyond words, but grateful for the understanding that had dawned at last. "I ask no debt," he said, "only that you remember, not all that is old and strange is to be feared, and sometimes the smallest light can stand against the greatest darkness." That night, though the winds still howled and the rains fell in torrents, there was peace within the village, and Radagast slept at last, though his dreams were filled with visions of the road yet to be traveled and the perils that still lay ahead. For even now, far to the east, another power stirred, more subtle and more dangerous than the broken servants of shadow he had thus far faced. And Radagast knew that the true test of his strength and purpose was yet to come. When the morning came at last, it was gray and sullen, and the rain fell in fine, ceaseless sheets that blurred the distant hills and cast the village into a world of mist and dripping roofs. Radagast rose early, before even the roosters had found their voice, and gathered his few belongings with quiet care. Mindful of the sleeping folk around him, he knew well that he could not linger. For though he had won a respite in this place and found a brief measure of safety, the shadow that hunted him would not be so easily thwarted, and each moment he tarried increased the peril both for himself and for those who had offered him their reluctant kindness. The chieftain met him at the gate, wrapped in a heavy cloak of wolf skins, the hood drawn low against the rain. He said little, but his eyes, hard as they were, held a glimmer of respect, and he pressed into Radagast's hand a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Bread, dried meat, and a flask of clear spring water, the gifts of a people who had little, but gave nonetheless with open heart. Radagast thanked him with words few and simple, and with a final nod he turned his face eastward, stepping once more into the wild lands that lay beyond the meager fields and palisades of the village. The way was hard and lonely, and the rain showed no mercy, seeping into every fold of his cloak and chilling him to the bone. The hills rose before him, barren and windswept, their crowns lost in cloud, and the rivers he crossed were swollen and swift, their waters cold as the snows of the far mountains. Yet Radagast pressed on, for the scrolls weighed heavily upon his mind, and he could feel the peril growing with each league he placed behind him, as if some vast net were being drawn slowly tighter about him by unseen hands. For a time he traveled without incident, save for the hardships of the road and the weariness that gnawed ever more deeply at his strength. The birds of the air and the beasts of the field still came to him, bringing tidings of the land ahead, and from them he learned that the wild was not as empty as it seemed. Fires were seen on distant hilltops, and strange voices were heard upon the wind, speaking in tongues long forgotten by mortal men. Fires were seen on distant hilltops, and travelers whispered of riders who bore no banners and left no tracks, yet whose coming was marked by fear and silence. Radagast pondered these things as he walked, and his heart grew heavy, for he knew that such signs boded ill, and that the forces stirred by the fall of Mindon Ninui would not rest until they had claimed either the scrolls or the life of the one who bore them. Yet he did not despair, for he had known from the beginning that the task laid upon him would not be an easy one, and he trusted still in the quiet strength of the earth and the unseen forces of hope. Thus he came at length to the edge of a great forest, an ancient and brooding wood whose trees stood tall and close together, their branches intertwining so thickly that little light penetrated their leafy canopy. The forest was nameless to most, for men feared to tread its paths, and even the birds gave it a wide berth, speaking of it only in hushed tones and with a shuddering of wings. Yet Radagast felt no fear as he gazed upon it, only a deep and solemn awe, for he knew that the forest was old beyond reckoning, a remnant of the elder days when Middle-earth was young and the world was full of wonders, both fair and fell. Drawing his cloak tighter about him, he entered the shadow of the trees, and at once the sounds of the outside world fell away, muffled and distant, as if he had passed through a curtain into another age. The ground beneath his feet was soft with moss and fallen leaves, and the air was rich with the scent of earth and growing things. Yet beneath it all there was a strange tension, a sense of watchfulness that set the hairs upon his neck on end. Here he knew he would find no simple beasts or friendly woodsmen, but older powers, secretive and proud, who might look upon him with suspicion, or worse. Still he pressed forward, for there was no other way open to him, and he trusted that the love he bore for all living things would shield him from harm. As he walked, he sang softly to himself, songs of the forests of old, of the trees that had spoken with the voices of friends, and of the rivers that had danced with the laughter of the stars. His voice, though thin and weary, seemed to stir the air about him, and the trees, though they did not answer in words, seemed to lean back slightly from his path, as if granting him grudging passage. Thus Radagast journeyed deep into the heart of the forest, and as he went, the shadows grew deeper and the silence heavier, until it seemed that he walked not through a place of earth and stone, but through a living dream, where every leaf and branch watched and waited. He saw strange lights flickering among the trees, soft will-o'-the-wisp glimmers that danced and vanished when approached. And he heard voices whispering in languages he could not name, the sounds drifting like mist through the tangled undergrowth. Hours passed, or perhaps days, for in that place time flowed strangely, and Radagast could not have said how long he walked before he came at last to a clearing at the forest's heart. There, in the midst of a circle of towering oaks, whose bark was black with age, and whose roots rose from the earth like the backs of slumbering beasts, stood a stone, tall and worn, yet still bearing the faint traces of ancient carvings. Around it grew a ring of pale flowers, their petals gleaming like silver in the dim light, and the air about them was heavy with a perfume that was both sweet and sad. Radagast approached the stone slowly, sensing that this place was one of great power and deep memory. And as he drew near, he saw that the carvings upon its surface were not random, but told a story, a tale of sorrow and hope, of a king who had fallen, and a promise that had not yet been fulfilled. He laid his hand upon the stone, and at once a voice spoke within his mind, soft and mournful. "Bearer of the old wisdom, why do you trouble the silence of the forgotten?" Radagast answered not with words, but with a silent offering of his purpose, laying bare his heart and the weight of the scrolls he carried. And for a long moment there was no sound save the stirring of the wind among the ancient trees. Then the voice spoke again, and this time there was a note of acceptance tinged with sorrow. "Pass, O faithful one, yet beware, for the shadow that follows you grows stronger with each step you take, and the road to healing is paved with many sorrows." Radagast bowed low before the stone, and as he rose, the circle of flowers parted before him, revealing a narrow path leading onward, deeper into the forest, and toward whatever fate awaited him beyond. Thus, with staff in hand and hope burning low, but unextinguished in his heart, Radagast the Brown pressed onward into the deepening twilight, bearing the last wisdom of Beleriand into the unknown. The path that Radagast followed wound ever deeper into the heart of the ancient wood, and as he walked, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms, and the shadows grew longer and stranger, as though the trees themselves bent closer to whisper secrets to one another beyond the understanding of mortal men. No bird sang, and no beast stirred, and the silence that wrapped itself about him was profound and full of hidden things, both fair and foul. Yet Radagast, though wearied in body and burdened in spirit, pressed on with unwavering purpose, for he knew that only by steadfastness would he carry his charge to safety, and with it the hope of healing for the wounded world. Long he walked beneath the boughs of that ancient forest, and time, which elsewhere marched onward with relentless tread, seemed here to falter and waver, so that Radagast could not tell whether he journeyed for a single night or for many days. His thoughts grew heavy, and the weariness of his long travels pressed upon him more sorely with each step, until it seemed that every root and stone sought to ensnare his feet, and every shadow to call him aside into the forgetfulness of sleep. At last, when he could go no farther without rest, he came upon a glade where the trees grew thin and the ground was soft with moss. And there he cast himself down, wrapping his cloak about him and laying the precious scrolls at his side. A soft murmur of a hidden brook sang somewhere near at hand, and the air was sweet with the breath of unseen flowers. And Radagast, who had wrestled long against the lure of slumber, at last closed his eyes and surrendered to the deep, dream-laden sleep of the weary. But in that sleep he was not free from peril, for the powers that hunted him had woven a snare of dreams, subtle and perilous, beyond any force of arms. At first he dreamed of Rhosgobel, of his simple house among the trees, and of the beasts and birds he loved, of the green fields stretching wide under the kindly sun, and the rivers running clear as crystal. He saw the creatures of the wood come to him without fear, and he heard again the songs of the elves in the twilight, fair and sad, beyond mortal telling. Then the dream deepened, and he saw himself crowned with ivy and clothed in robes of shimmering green, sitting upon a throne at the heart of a vast forest that stretched without end in every direction. The beasts of the earth and the birds of the air came to him as to a king, and even the winds and the waters spoke his name with reverence. The wounded lands healed at his word, and the scars of war and sorrow were wiped away as if they had never been. Middle-earth was reborn, and Radagast, its gentle master, loved and honored by all. And a voice, sweet as honey and soft as the spring rain, whispered in his ear, "Take up the power that lies within your grasp. You need not struggle alone and in darkness. With the scrolls you carry, you could remake the world according to the wisdom of the firstborn. No more sorrow, no more strife, only peace, and you, its wise shepherd." Radagast, even in the depths of the dream, was sorely tempted. For what heart, seeing the world so healed, could not yearn to make it so? He saw the faces of the wounded beasts, the fallen trees, the rivers choked with sorrow, and his heart cried out to reach for the power that was offered. His hand in the dream reached toward the scrolls now glowing with an inner light, and he felt the strength of the ancient knowledge thrumming beneath his fingertips. But even as his hand drew near, a shadow passed before his inner sight. A shadow not cast by evil alone, but by pride, by the desire to rule, even for good intent. He saw the price that would be paid, the freedom of the living things he loved, crushed beneath the weight of his own will. The silence of the forests, where once there had been song, the terrible burden of deciding who should live and who should fall, placed upon shoulders never meant to bear it. With a great cry of anguish, Radagast drew back his hand and turned away from the throne and the gleaming scrolls. And at once the dream world around him shuddered and cracked like ice underfoot. The throne crumbled into dust. The endless forest withered into gray waste, and the voice that had tempted him shrieked with rage and disappointment, fading into a bitter wind that swept the vision away. Radagast awoke with a start, the moss damp against his cheek and the scrolls cool and silent beneath his hand. The glade was as he had found it, green and living, untouched by the darkness of the dream. But he knew that he had faced a trial as deadly as any blade or spell, and that had he failed, the scrolls and all their precious knowledge would have been turned to ruinous ends. He rose slowly, his limbs stiff and aching, but his heart lighter than it had been for many days. For he had proven to himself that his purpose was true, not driven by pride or the lust for dominion, but by love and a deep humility. Taking up his staff once more and securing the scrolls safely beneath his cloak, he set his face eastward, following the narrow path that wound onward through the towering trees. Thus Radagast the Brown, having refused the crown of false kingship and the seduction of easy power, passed deeper into the ancient forest, alone, yet not alone. For the very earth itself seemed now to recognize him as a true friend and guardian. And though the shadow still followed, growing nearer with every step, it found in Radagast no foothold of doubt or pride by which to seize him. The forest began at length to change as Radagast pressed onward. The trees grew less tightly together, and the undergrowth thinned, though the air remained heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth. The canopy above lifted, allowing shafts of pale light to pierce the gloom, and the path, once a narrow thread winding through dark and secret places, broadened into a green way, where the grass grew soft and thick beneath his feet. Yet with every step eastward, Radagast felt a tightening in the air, a tension as of a string drawn taut, and he knew that the hour of his greatest trial was drawing near, for the shadow that had pursued him from the broken tower of Mindon Ninui had not abandoned its hunt. The birds that had sung faintly among the trees fell silent, and the small beasts that scurried through the undergrowth vanished from sight, as if all the living things of the forest had withdrawn before some unseen terror. Radagast gripped his staff more firmly and drew his cloak about him, though no wind stirred, and he whispered soft words of courage to himself, recalling the songs of Yavanna and the promises made long ago to those who chose to walk the lonely paths of Middle-earth in service of its healing. Thus it was that he came at last to a broad clearing where no grass grew, and the earth was bare and cracked, as if scorched by fire long ago. In the center of the clearing stood a great stone, black and jagged, its surface veined with crimson, as though blood had seeped into it and hardened there. The sky above was heavy and low, and a darkness not born of cloud or night gathered in the air, swirling about the stone like smoke. From behind the stone, a figure emerged, tall and terrible to look upon. Cloaked in robes of deepest black, it seemed at once man and shadow, and its face was hidden beneath a hood, from which two pale eyes gleamed with a cruel light. In its hand it bore a staff of twisted iron, from whose tip a dark mist coiled and writhed like a living thing. The ground withered where it stepped, and the very air recoiled from its presence. Radagast knew at once what this creature was, though he had never before seen its like. A fragment of the ancient evil that had once served Morgoth in the elder days, now broken and wandering, yet filled with bitter malice and an insatiable hunger for power. It was a thing of will and hatred, clinging to existence by force of its own rage, and it had marked Radagast as its prey. The figure spoke, and its voice was like the grinding of stones beneath the earth, filled with an ancient malice that chilled the heart. "Long have I waited, Radagast the Brown. Long have I hungered for the wisdom that you now bear. Give me the scrolls, and I shall grant you safe passage. Refuse, and you shall be unmade, your name lost to the winds of this dying world." Radagast stood tall, though he was weary and his strength greatly spent. And he answered with a voice that rang clear across the desolate clearing. "I will not yield what was entrusted to me. I am but a humble servant of the living world. Yet even the smallest flame may defy the greatest darkness. You shall have no victory here." At this the shadow laughed, a hollow, joyless sound that seemed to shake the stones themselves, and with a gesture of its iron staff, it summoned forth a host of wraith-like creatures from the edges of the clearing. Pale, insubstantial forms whose faces were twisted in endless sorrow, and whose fingers clawed hungrily at the air. They moved forward as one, a tide of despair and hatred, and Radagast knew that he must stand alone against them, lest the scrolls fall into ruin and all hope be lost. He planted his staff firmly before him, and calling upon the deep strength of the earth, he summoned a barrier of living light, green and gold and white, woven from the memory of all that grew and sang in the hidden places of the world. The barrier flared outward, pushing back the wraiths, but the shadow itself was undeterred, and it raised its staff once more, hurling bolts of black fire against the light. The clearing became a place of thunder and storm, where light and darkness warred, and the very earth trembled beneath their struggle. Radagast poured all his will into the defense, drawing upon the songs of the trees, the laughter of the rivers, and the silent watchfulness of the stones. Yet he knew that he could not endure forever. His strength was not that of warriors, and the shadow, though broken, drew upon wells of hatred that seemed bottomless. In that moment of near despair, Radagast remembered the dream he had faced within the forest, the temptation of power, the seduction of dominion, and he understood that he could not defeat the shadow by force alone. It was not enough to resist its strength. He must deny it the very sustenance it sought. Mighty, but now you are only memory, and mighty, but now you are only memory and hatred, clinging to a world that has passed you by. I do not fear you, for you have no life of your own, only the echo of a life that has ended. The shadow recoiled as if struck, and its form wavered and flickered. The wraiths shrank back, and the black fire faltered and died. For a moment the clearing was silent, and Radagast stepped forward, his staff lowered, his hands open in peace. "Go now into the darkness that made you," he said. "Find your end, and trouble the living world no more." The shadow howled then, a cry of fury and despair so terrible that the trees at the edge of the clearing bowed before it, and the earth itself seemed to shudder. But it could not endure the light of Radagast's mercy, and with a final shriek it tore itself apart, dissolving into wisps of smoke that the wind seized and scattered into the west. The clearing fell silent once more, and the black stone cracked and crumbled into dust, leaving only the soft green shoots of new grass pushing up through the broken earth. Radagast stood alone, his strength all but spent, but in his heart a great peace blossomed, for he knew that the greatest peril was past, and that he had preserved the hope of the world through humility and love, not through the conquest of power. Gathering the scrolls close once more, he turned his steps eastward toward the lands where green things still grew and the rivers still sang, knowing that though many labors yet awaited him, he had remained true to his purpose, and that the seeds of healing he carried would one day bear fruit beyond even his imagining. Thus, Radagast the Brown passed from the dark places into the light, bearing with him the last memory of Beleriand and the promise of a new spring for Middle-earth. The path eastward from the clearing was long and winding, yet no longer did it bear the heavy darkness that had shadowed Radagast's steps before. The air was lighter now, filled with the scent of growing things and the low murmur of waters running free. The ancient forest, though still vast and solemn, seemed to lean back from his passage, as a host might bow to a weary traveler returning from far battles. And the light of the sun, veiled for so long, broke through the canopy in shafts of gold, touching leaf and stone with gentle fire. The birds, too, returned, flitting from bough to bough with cries of welcome, and even the smallest of creatures came forth to watch him pass, as if recognizing in him a bearer of tidings long awaited. Radagast moved slowly, for the toll of his long journey weighed upon him, and though the peril that had dogged his steps from the ruins of Mindon Ninui was now vanquished, the burden he carried had grown no lighter. Yet there was in his heart a deep and abiding peace, like the quiet strength of the mountains or the enduring patience of the forests, for he knew that his task was near its end, and that he had guarded the ancient wisdom of the elves with faith unbroken and hands unsullied. At length, after many days of walking beneath the green boughs, he came out from the forest and into a land of rolling hills and swift, clear streams, where the grasses grew thick and the flowers turned their faces gladly to the sky. Far off he could see the first hints of Rhosgobel, his humble home at the edge of the great woods, and beyond it the vast and whispering reaches of Mirkwood, now brightened here and there with patches of new life, as though the earth itself had heard of Radagast's coming and had begun to hope again. The folk of that region, simple woodmen and hunters, greeted him with wonder and joy, for he had long been absent, and many had feared that he had gone into the wild and perished, as others had before him. Yet Radagast spoke little of his journey, saying only that he had walked far under strange stars and seen wonders both fair and terrible, and that he returned with a burden of great importance, which must be guarded with wisdom and care. The people, though they did not understand the fullness of his words, honored him nonetheless, for they perceived that some great labor had been laid upon him, and that he had borne it with steadfastness beyond the measure of ordinary men. Thus Radagast came again to Rhosgobel, to his house of many rooms, half buried in the living earth, its walls entwined with vines and crowned with flowers, and its gardens teeming with creatures great and small. He passed through the gate, which creaked softly on its hinges, and was greeted by the chirping of birds and the scurrying of rabbits and foxes, and all the familiar sounds of life he had long missed. In the quiet of his home, he laid the scrolls upon a table carved from the heart of an ancient tree, and there he unwrapped them from their silver-green cloth, and gazed once more upon the writings of the Eldar, their letters shining faintly with a light that came not from any earthly flame. He spent many days in study, reading the scrolls by the light of the sun and the stars, and learning the secrets they held. Secrets of healing and renewal, of speech with beasts and trees, and of the deep forgotten music that binds all living things together. And he knew that this knowledge was not for himself alone, nor for any one race or kingdom, but for all who would labor to heal the wounds of Middle-earth, and to guard against the shadows that would rise again in days to come. Radagast understood that he could not wield this wisdom as a weapon, nor impose it by force upon the world. Rather, he must sow it like a gardener sowing seeds, trusting that in their own time and place they would take root and grow. Quietly he began to teach those who would listen, the woodmen, the wanderers, the simple folk of the land, passing to them small fragments of the great lore he had preserved, always mindful that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the nurturing of what is good and free. Seasons passed, and Radagast grew older, though the mark of age touched him lightly, for he was of a kind who wear the years as a cloak, growing not weaker, but wiser with their passing. The woods around Rhosgobel grew greener, the rivers clearer, and even the shadows of Mirkwood receded somewhat under the influence of his quiet labor. Tales began to spread of a gentle wizard clad in brown, a friend to all living things, whose coming brought healing and hope to the sick and the sorrowing. Yet Radagast sought no renown, and often he would wander alone into the deep places of the earth, speaking with the ancient trees and the secret waters, and listening to the forgotten songs of the world. And though he knew that darker days would come, and that the struggle between light and shadow would never wholly cease while the world endured, he held fast to the hope that the seeds he had planted would grow in their season, and that one day, long after his own part was ended, they would bear fruit beyond all imagining. Thus ended the journey of Radagast the Brown, from the last tower of Beleriand to the green woods of Middle-earth. A journey not of conquest or glory, but of humble service and unyielding faithfulness, by which a small and weary wanderer preserved the memory of what was best and brightest in the elder days, and passed it forward into a world ever in need of healing. And though the sea would claim many lands, and the stars would wheel their courses through long ages yet to come, still the quiet work of Radagast lived on, like a hidden spring beneath the earth, ready to rise again whenever the world called for renewal.